In this video, I'll show you the very fundamentals of DaVinci Resolve Fusion. Fusion is a node-based compositing software which gives you a lot of creative control when it comes to editing videos and adding visual effects. I use this a lot for my workflows, and you've probably already seen it in my videos. So that's why I wanted to break it down and show you the very basics of this software. By the end of this video, you should be able to understand how Fusion works, how to build and read nodes, and how to start adding visual effects to your footage. This is the foundation for everything. Once you understand this, you're much better off as an editor and creative, and your content will stand out much more when you actually have editing and compositing skills. For this to work, you'll need DaVinci Resolve 21 installed. You can either choose the free version or the studio version. This is part of a free course inside my school community. So if you are interested in being part of a community who is into the latest AI editing and VFX tools, and you want to get access to all the resources and tools I'll use in this channel, check out the VFX Basecamp. Now let's go to DaVinci Resolve and master the basics. To go to the Fusion page in DaVinci Resolve, there are several ways to do it. The easiest way is to just select your clip you want to edit and then select the Fusion icon. Once you've done that, we will have the Fusion page already opened with your clip selected. Another way we can do it is by right-clicking on your selected clip and then open in Fusion page. I also have a shortcut for this, arrow up, so that way I can quickly go into the Fusion page with my clip selected. You can also make a Fusion composition by right-clicking on your media pool, then new Fusion composition, and here you can select your duration, rename it, and your frame rate. That way we also have a Fusion composition which we can open. There's nothing selected yet. That's because it's a blank Fusion composition. Now that you know how to open Fusion, let's go into the basics on how to actually use it. And the first thing you'll notice, we have two separate viewers, the A viewer and the B viewer. We can also select one viewer with this icon right here, and then we see our footage. This is our default workspace. We can also go to Workspace, Layout Presets, and then choose another preset. For example, mid-flow. We'll have all the nodes on the right side and our footage on the left side. I like working this way, but for the sake of this tutorial, I will just use the default preset. Notice we have this toolbar, and these are all the most common nodes we can use in Fusion. For example, if I select this background node, and we can add it here in our nodes, then we see our background node. But there are many different ways we can add nodes. We also have the shortcut, Control and spacebar, and then we can type in nodes and add them onto the pipeline. You can also right-click and then add tool, and we have different tools and nodes we can add right here. But the way I always work is remembering the most common nodes and then Control spacebar and then type in your node that you want. For example, the magic mask tool, we can type that in and add it onto the nodes. When you never used nodes before, I will try to explain it in an easy to follow way so you can understand what it actually does. For example, when I go to the edit page, I have a solid layer right here, and this is stacked on top of our footage. So now, because this is the top layer, we only see our background. But if I add my footage layer on top, you will only see the footage. Everyone knows this, it's a layer system. When you're used to it, it makes sense. But with nodes, we have to shift our thinking a bit because it's using blocks instead of this layer system. And to demonstrate, I will select my footage right here and then add a background node. And when I added this background node, it will add a solid on top of our footage. Same thing we did in the editing page, but now in the Fusion page. And now it added a merge node and a background node. Before we do anything, I recommend right-clicking and then arrange tools and choose to connect it. When we do that, the nodes will snap onto the grid, and it's much easier to work this way. Now, what is this merge node? This merge node will merge this background on top of our footage. So the merge node is simply used to stack different elements together. For example, if I select my merge node and then in the blend, we can blend between this node and this node. But how do you know when a node is on top of it or behind the footage? And with nodes, we can also arrange the order. Just like the editing page, we have this solid color on top of our footage or behind our footage, so it's not visible. Same thing in Fusion. Right now, it's on top of our footage, but we can change the order so it's behind our footage. And the way you know the order is with the green input and the orange input. Now, when I hover over this orange input, we can clearly see this is our background. So orange means background. Then I go to the green input, and that's the foreground. So right now, this black solid is on the foreground and our footage is on the background. And we can right click on our merge and we can swap inputs. That way we will swap the foreground and the background inputs. So right now this solid is an orange color, which means the background, and our footage is a green color, which means the foreground. We also have a shortcut for this, Control or Command T, and that way we can change the order. And this is the most basic thing ever in Fusion. If you don't understand this, then you can't work within Fusion. We have to know what the green input and the orange input is, and the way you stack different elements on top of each other. We also have another input on our node, and that is the blue color, which means an effect mask. So you can use this for masks and alpha channels. This is another input for that. And just to demonstrate, here we have different mask options. If I select an ellipse mask, when this background is selected, it will automatically add a mask onto our alpha channel input. So now the solid is masked out with our ellipse. And we can change the scale of this by using Shift and then scaling the width and height of this. You can also invert the mask, so we have something like this, and add some soft edge to this. That is the basic of how to use a mask. Notice that we also have two dots here when you select a node. That means when you hover over it, left view and right view. And we can access this by using the 1 and 2 key. So on your keyboard, we can hit 1, and then it's going to show on the left viewer. But the way we see that is going to the split view. And now we have two viewers, one for the ellipse, we can change right here, and one for our output. And that is a great way to see what one node is doing while seeing your final output. You can also drag our nodes. For example, if I want this ellipse shown in the right viewer, I can simply drag it right here, or I can press the 2 key to preview it on the right viewer. And then our output, we can select 1, for example. So now we have it on the left viewer and our mask on the right viewer. We also have a third dot called Open VR. That is for previewing VR footage. But I don't have any VR thing open right now, so we can't really use this. You can also just select our dots if we want to view it somewhere. Also an important thing, let's say we don't want to have this mask shown. We can also select our node tree right here and then use a shortcut Control or Command P to hide it. So when this is grayed out, our nodes will be hidden. You can also select them all, right click, then go to modes and then choose pass through. So this node structure will just pass through and will be hidden from your worksheet. Now this merge node was used to stack an element on top of your footage, but we can also just add different effects onto it without using a merge. For example, I can add a blur node to blur out our footage. I can simply hit Shift and then drag it between the merge node and the media out. And when I select this blur node, we can blur out our whole footage with also our background selected. Let's say I don't want to blur out this element. I can hit Shift to disconnect that node and then place it before the merge. And it's kind of hard to see, but if I blur this out completely, you will see this element is not blurred out. So right now this ellipse is not blurred out, but if I would add it in front of it, then it will be blurred out. So the order of where you place things is very important when using this node-based system. When you go to the merge, we can also change the operation mode and change the order right here. For example, in this operator mode in the merge, we can also choose mask. So that means our ellipse and background will mask out our footage. I will hide this blur for now so we can see what it's doing. So when I select this merge and choose mask, for example, it will mask out our footage using that ellipse. In the ellipse, we can also invert it. I recommend just playing around with this very simple node structure and see all the different operation modes and just get used to the node-based system. Once you're used to that, we can move on to a more advanced workflow. I will undo this and I will also show you different nodes we can use, for example, keying out our green screen footage. Now, if I want to key out my footage right here, we only need to select our green screen. So for that, we can add a mask onto this green screen so it only looks at that portion of the footage. There are several ways we can do this. We can add a mask directly on our footage and then we have something like this. But we can also add a background node. Then we can add a polygon mask onto this background and then create a mask around that green screen, just like this. You can also hold it and drag it to make a curve. We also have different options on the top here. We can add points, we can make it smooth. There's all sorts of things we can add onto this polygon mask, but let's just create it like so. Then go to the merge and in the operator mode, I will select it to mask. And then we masked out this portion of our footage. I will select these nodes and place them right here. Now we can add a keyer, for example, to key out that green screen. And in Fusion, the most common one is delta keyer. And with this icon right here, we can select our background color and then key out the green color. You can also select our individual channels. For example, I want to see this alpha channel of the mask we just created. So I can hit A on the keyboard to see our alpha of our footage. We can also go on the top here and then select our different channels. You can also select our red channel, our green channel, blue channel, or like we did now, our alpha channel. Then go to your matte and here we can clip the white and black values. And we can also adjust the mask where needed. Now hit A again and then we see a perfect mask of our subject. Now after the mask we can also add another background and then change the order hitting Ctrl T. So now we have a black background behind our subject. We can also change the color right here to something like red, for example. And we can also add some color corrections to this. So we can type in color corrector and then add it onto the pipeline. But when I add some contrast here, it will also add contrast onto our background. And I don't really want that. So I will add our color corrector only in front of our footage. But there's one thing we need to change. When we go to options, make sure to hit pre-divide and post multiply. So that way it will look at our alpha channel of our footage. And then the color corrector node will only be affecting this footage. And this is an extreme example, but I can tone it down a bit and change the colors like this. And these were some of the basics in compositing within Fusion. Once you understand this, it goes a long way and we can go much more in depth. Now in DaVinci Resolve and Fusion, you can also animate your videos using keyframes. I will quickly show you how to do that. First thing we can do is go back to our editing page. And if you want to have some basic animation, for example, this video, I want it to zoom out like this. We can add keyframes to add an animation to this. And keyframes are these dots we see right here with every parameter we want to change. For example, when I hit this dot, it becomes a red dot. And that means it added a keyframe for us. So if I go forward in time now, and I change this parameter to something like 0.6, then it's automatically gonna create a keyframe for us. And based on the timing of these two keyframes, it will then go from point A to B. And we can see these keyframes by going to this icon right here called Show Keyframe Tray. When we select that, we have another window we can see, and these are the transform keyframes we adjusted. We can also edit these keyframes so it's a bit more smooth. To edit keyframes, we can use something called curves. In the parameters, we have two separate icons, one for the keyframe itself and one for keyframe curves. When you select keyframe curves, we see the curve from point A to point B. And right now it's a linear curve, so it's exactly going from that point onto that point. What if you want the keyframes to go slowly in the beginning and then fade off into the end? So we have different easing modes for our keyframes. We have ease in and out, and ease out. If I choose ease in and out, it will ease those keyframes. And we also have handles, so we can adjust the keyframes if we want to. If I preview these keyframes, it will have an ease in and out. And it instantly looks a lot better, but we can change it whichever way we want. For example, I want it to go fast in and then slowly fade off. Then we do something like this. And when you look at that animation now, it looks very different than we had before. And that is the way you can control your animations. We also have a dedicated keyframes tab, so we can adjust the same things we have here, but having a bit more space when it's docked on the left side. And of course, we have all sorts of parameters we can add keyframes to. Now I'll go back to the Fusion page and show you how to use keyframes in there. Now in Fusion, I want to create the same animation, and for that I will add a transform node. So type in transform, shortcut XF. So type in XF, and then we have a transform node. Now we have all the same parameters and we can change the size. If you don't want this checker underlay, we can go to the three dots and then disable the checker underlay. When you double click on the parameter, it will go back to the standard, and right now we're at 1 again. So in Fusion we have a timeline, and this is displaying all the frames within our footage. And I will go to frame 0 and place a keyframe for the size. Then I'll go forward a few frames and change the size to something like 0.6. And when you look at the transform node now, we see we have a keyframe icon displayed. When you see this icon, you'll know it contains keyframes. When I select this transform node, you will also see it displayed with a white line in our timeline. And just like we had in the editing page, we can also preview and see our keyframes this way. So when we select keyframes, we have another tab, and when you go to zoom to fit, you will see the transform we just created. And then when you zoom in with Control and scroll wheel, we can see our keyframes. And you can also add ease in and ease out. The way I always do this in Fusion is by selecting those keyframes and hit S for smooth. We can also go to the Spline editor, and then we have our spline just like we had in the editing page, but we see it in a different tab. And here I can also select these handles and change it whichever way I want. And then we have an animation like this, very basic, very smooth, but this is the way you can animate things in DaVinci Resolve. And you can do this for any parameter that you want to change. I can even go to the timeline here and also change the timing of these keyframes. For selecting them, hit Ctrl or Command, and then we can drag it over and duplicate those same keyframes. When you right click on them, you also have different options you can choose. For example, copy values, making it smooth, reversing the keyframes. There's all sorts of things we can do when you right click on a parameter. We can also change the timing of our footage, for example, in a timeline system. So you can use the timeline for your timing of everything, and then use the nodes for the compositing and editing of the footage. And that was everything you need to know to get started in Fusion.